Hi, welcome to the Civic Pulse with David Bonior, former Michigan Congressman and Whip, and Brian Brady, myself. This morning, we are really lucky. We have an amazing special guest, and we're going to jump right in with Mark Brewer, who is a campaign finance election nonprofit union attorney, Mount Clemens proud alum of the public schools. He's also went to some lowly regarded schools like Harvard and Stanford Law, and but is done some amazing political work over the years, including running 18 years running the Michigan Democratic Party, being the president of the state Democratic chairs, and working with Howard Dean, one of some of the best national efforts to revitalize the party. We could go a million different directions. You have too long of a resume, Mark, so I'm going to stop there. But thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be with you. And all of that is to David Bonior's credit, my mentor and friend for a long time. So anything I've done well in my life, give credit to David.
Yeah, let's start there. How long have you guys known each other? When did it get started?
Well, Mark is too kind. We've known each other since 1977. We're going almost 50 years pretty soon. So he was a student then. Worked in our campaigns and was an intern, and we've known each other just for many, many years. And he's been a great, great supporter, and not only supporter. He's worked his way into a position where he was our best counsel. We went to him for ideas and opinions, and as you can see, he's 18 years as the Democratic Party chair in Michigan, probably the longest in the state, and has ever been. And of course, he was thought highly of by his fellow state party chairs around the country, that they elected him president of their association or chair of their association. So he's done magnificent work in protecting civil liberties, people's rights, workers' rights. He's got a great resume. Too long for us to just focus on today because there's so many other things to talk about. But it's always good to see him, and especially to have him on the show today.
And we're 16 days out from the election, so there's so many topics we want to dive in, because Mark, you have your pulse on all the legal issues happening around the country. And we want to go there, and also what's happening in Michigan, really vital swing state. But we had such a weird week in the news once again, which it always seems the case with Donald Trump, with dancing for 40 minutes, with talk about genitalia of Arnold Palmer. Just a whole host then you had the Brett Baier Kamala Harris interview, but it seems like all in all a winning week for Kamala Harris. What do you two think about this crazy race?
Well, I think as we've seen, there's nothing Trump can say or do that turns off his base of supporters, right? They excuse it. They think he's entertaining, and they don't really see it for what it is, which I think, frankly, is mental decline and somebody who's incredibly unstable and a real risk to national security. We had a guest on our podcast here in Michigan this week, a retired general, who was very articulate about this threat to national security that Trump poses. I mean, making side deals and having side conversations with Putin. Lord knows what he's done with all that national security information. So, yeah, the weirdness continues. Unfortunately, except for a handful of voters, I don't think it makes much of a difference.
We do have to plug you have a great pod with Jeff Timmer, a Republic if you can keep it. I was just listening to it. This is a great episode. So if you're watching this, go to this pod next. David, what do you think?
Well, it was a weird week, and unfortunately, we have too many of these weird weeks, especially coming out of Trump's mouth. But I think the thing that really got my attention, particularly this week, was the fact that he went after people. He said he's going to get the army to get into people who are the enemy within. Those are words that are used by autocrats, dictators, and they're very dangerous, very dangerous. It's becoming more and more clear, per Mark's comments with respect to people who are in national security and what they've been saying about Trump, more and more clear what a danger he poses to the stability of the country and to the values of the country. If we're a democratic country that has values respecting people's rights, That's really being threatened, and I think we'll see a very sad day if he's elected.
Yeah, the references to vermin, unpure blood, and so forth. I mean, that's straight out of the autocrat, dictator, fascist playbook,
Right.
frankly. And, there are people, a lot of his people applaud that. It's the reaction that concerns me. I'm not surprised that Trump says that anymore, but that many of his supporters and voters approve of that language and that attitude. That's very dangerous for the country.
Just staying on that theme a little bit, you kind of scared the bejesus out of me, Mark, on your pod recently, where you talked about a nightmare scenario. I mean, you in Michigan, you do have some nutty militias, and one of them tried to attack Governor Whitmer at once, or created a plan to. And you on your pod, lay out a little bit what you spoke of a nightmare scenario there.
Well, there is that dark side in Michigan. The Oklahoma City bomber, people may remember, trained in the thumb of Michigan, set off explosives, planning that bombing. And we have had a history of extremism here, the Klan and others, the Whitmer kidnap and murder plot. People should remember, it wasn't just kidnapping. They were going to execute her. And so there's this dark side here. We have a lot of militia groups, until they cracked down on it a little bit. We had armed people in the gallery of our legislature, peering down on legislators carrying AR-15s.
That's unbelievable.
Right. So the concern that I have is, I think, first of all, I think we're going to face more violence if Trump loses than we faced in 2020. The rhetoric, the incendiary, violent rhetoric hasn't stopped. It's gotten worse. And he's getting people very amped up to believe that if he loses, there's something wrong and we need to take over the government because that must have been some kind of coup. So combine that with the fact that these are great things. We have early voting now. Yesterday in Detroit, people started voting in person. Fabulous. We have absentee voting, which started in late September. But there are hundreds of thousands of ballots now accumulating all over the state. And we can start to count those ballots. We don't release the results, but they can start to be tabulated 8 days before the election, Brian. That introduces tremendous security concerns. Those ballots have to be moved. They have to be tabulated. In some places, they'll be kept overnight, right? And particularly in Detroit, they're going to have hundreds of thousands of ballots to count. And that all just enhances the security risk that I'm very concerned about somebody, breaking in to the tabulating area overnight, destroying ballots, tampering or destroying tabulators. I mean, just tremendous security concerns. And I hope and I believe that our election officials here are aware of that threat and are taking appropriate precautions. But it's just extraordinary that we even have to talk about this in what's supposed to be an advanced democracy, that somebody could literally try to sabotage the election.
It's all about getting it to the House, right? Where Mike Johnson controls the House by a couple votes, right? And David, your experience as a whip, we'll play this nightmare scenario out. Just one more chapter. If you can keep that threshold below 270 and it gets thrown to the Supreme Court in the House, do you think Johnson and that the party would actually go along with some of the nuttiness?
Well, they've cleared out all those Republicans, basically defeated them all, who opposed the impeachment of Trump. I mean, they're all gone now, except for maybe one or two, I think, and they're being threatened in this election by Democrats, or in a jungle primary in Washington. There's a fellow that's got a situation where he could lose who voted against Trump. So yeah, there's not a lot of opposition to, I think, the speaker. And if Trump is elected, I think it would be a real problem. Or if we get into that situation where he could be elected by the Electoral College through some shenanigans, I think it's a serious situation.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
No, I was going to say, Mark, I was going to ask you what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're Trump, I'm just thinking about Michigan here, but it's true the other battleground states. he wants to deny Michigan to Harris. There's two ways to do that: either win it outright, or if she wins it, engage in these kind of shenanigans, disrupt the count, ask for a recount, file lawsuits, and try to stall and disrupt the process so that Michigan doesn't certify its electors on time,
right,
or there's some dispute about who those electors are. And then here we go into the Congress, and what happens with Michigan's electoral votes, if anything. I mean, it may well be one scenario would be Michigan has no electoral votes to be cast, and they make the determination based on the remaining states. And that's where I think all this is headed, Brian and David. Again, if he loses, try to make sure that those electoral votes still don't go to Harris.
And this
Mark-
happened before in the country in the Harrison race in the 1880s,
1876.
and they couldn't settle on a candidate for a variety of reasons, some in which you've just explained, and they ended up in the Congress, and they cut a deal, and the guy that came in second with the votes ended up becoming the president.
It sort of led to the re-enslavement quasi of African Americans, right? Because Reconstruction ended.
Yeah, about that time.
Mark, you must be part of a consortium. I'm just guessing here, but I bet I'm right. A consortium of attorneys who are working on election cases and also standing at the ready to help out when things go wrong. What's the latest in both legally Michigan and in nationally that you're keeping an eye on?
Well, like the other battleground states, we've seen almost weekly lawsuits filed here by Republicans, attempting to cause disruption. I think there's two strategies going on: the legal strategy itself, but also to create doubt in the system. I mean, say, oh, there's dozens of lawsuits pending. There must be something wrong, right? The last lawsuit that was filed was challenging the eligibility of military and overseas civilian voters. Just the most unpatriotic thing I could possibly think of. Hopefully that'll get tossed out. But again, there'll be appeals and so forth. And, these attacks on the system, on absentee voting, the eligibility of people, whether that voter rolls are accurate, it's all designed to throw sand in the gears here. So we got that set of lawsuits, Brian. But then, we're gearing up on a program I started on as party chair. We now have a massive election protection program on election day where we have thousands of lawyers and volunteers covering polling places prepared to go to court. We've expanded that now because of this early voting period. Actually, a week from today on Saturday, I have all day duty in the Democratic Party legal boiler room, in case there are legal problems at the early voting sites, because we have to be ready to cover issues there as well. And then there's the post-election. You mentioned a few moments ago, we're 3 or 4 weeks from election day. In my view, this week, we are 13 weeks from the inaugural. That's the date I'm counting towards. Because, it used to be very boring right after the election. The board of canvassers would meet. They'd certify the election. I might show up for a client and they'll say, who are you? Why are you here? Nobody cared. Now, my gosh, the attention, appropriately so, on those proceedings and what may happen is the focus. So the post-election period is now, I think, as important as the run-up to the actual election.
That's why I wanted to have Mark on the show, because I agree with him with that in his analysis that what happens after the election is just absolutely critical. If we ever needed a shotgun warning for that, it was January 6th. And so we've got to be ready. We've got to be prepared to do the best we can. I think they did a reasonably good job after Biden was challenged. I mean, everything that went to any court, seems like in the country, got shot down by the Trump petitions, got shot down by the judicial system. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, there could be recounts. That's one thing Trump didn't try here in 2020 in Michigan. And we have a procedure where we can do an expedited recount, but it takes time and it disrupts the system when you do that. We could have canvassing board members. We have 83 local boards of canvassers here that certify the results. If one or more of them refuse to certify because we have election deniers now sitting on these boards, Brian, the state has to take over. That's disruptive. That takes time. It's really easy to disrupt the system. It's very. I don't want to give the impression here that it's rickety. It's not.
Yeah.
We have good election administrators. They are planning for all these scenarios that we're describing here this morning, but that doesn't mean people won't try.
Yeah, like they did in Georgia, right?
Yep.
And what's the latest on the Georgia thing with the advisory committee that's maybe may require well, didn't they vote to require all ballots be hand counted?
Yeah, they required a couple of things that this week a Georgia judge blocked. He said, we're not going to go down this road of hand counting all the ballots. That board also gave the local boards discretion not to certify. Nope, they have a duty to certify. Now, that'll be appealed, but that was at least a good initial decision. Michigan is fortunate. We have the governor, the attorney general, secretary of state here, who are all believers in democracy with a small d. They're not going to put up with this election denialism. But in some of these other states, like Georgia, you have these election deniers and Trump allies in power, and they're going to try to manipulate the rules to help him.
Yeah.
Mark Elias gets a lot of, at least on Twitter, I don't know if of democracy docket, right, is of prosecuting a lot of these cases, but there must be a whole group of attorneys out there, right? How do you all organize? How do all the small d Democratic attorneys organize themselves to fight? Because it's just going to be an avalanche, possibly, of court cases.
Well, I mean, here in Michigan, we not only have the Democratic Party structure that I described a moment ago, but also the nonpartisan nonprofit world, which, I mean, I'm a lawyer for a wide variety of them, also has its own voter protection program. And that's existed for several years. That's already up and running. And we do talk to each other. We hold meetings where we go over various scenarios, and we try to coordinate to the extent legally that we can do that. But we're in the private sector. I mean, there's a limit in the end to what we can do from the outside. And that's, again, why it's so important to have public officials, Democrats and Republicans. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of fine, honest Republican election officials in this state who play it straight. They said, my job is to count the votes and let the chips fall where they may. Our job is to back them up and to provide legal and whatever other support we can to help them do their jobs.
Let's jump a little bit to the politics, because I know you're a legal expert, Mark, but you're also an election expert, and David and you have won a swing county in Macomb a number of times when David was running for Congress there. It seems like the polls are 0 to 5% Harris possibly winning, and you were saying the youth organizing vote is going really well before we got on, but also the perpetual worry is that the Gaza war will cause a drain on the vote. So give us, I'd love to hear from both of you just where you think the state of the race is in all important Michigan.
I guess I'll start. I mean, I think it's all knotted up here. I mean, Harris can win, but Michigan has changed a lot over the last 50 years. David was right. Back in the 90s, NAFTA was not only a disaster economically for manufacturing in Michigan and this country, it was also a disaster politically because working class voters of all races and ethnicities, not just white, black, Hispanic, and others, felt that the Democratic Party turned their back on them. And that's something that Trump has taken advantage of. And we're still seeing that political damage play out today as blue collar workers are attracted to Trump because of his protectionist and other kind of rhetoric, taking advantage of their economic situation. There are other cross currents too. You mentioned, Brian, Gaza and the Middle East. That has undermined support for Harris in that community. But there's cross-cutting things as well. I mean, Trump's, violent rhetoric and his positions on things like choice has pulled a lot of Republicans to vote Democratic. I can't say they become Democrats, but they voted for Governor Whitmer. They voted for Joe Biden. I think a lot of them are going to support Harris. Macomb County itself has changed in other ways. We have a significant, though still a minority, African-American population now. Something that didn't exist when I started politics with David back in the 70s.
Oh,
so there are those issues as well. And you just got to be able to adapt when you're doing politics in Michigan, whether it's in Macomb County or anywhere else, because conditions change. The voting blocks change, and you've got to get to 50% somehow.
I think that's a good summary, Mark. Excellent summary. I think one of the big issues between now and when they start counting the votes is what's going to happen in the Arab American Muslim community in Michigan. And I had a very close relationship with those two communities when I was in Congress for civil liberty issues as well as anything. Foreign policy issues were important, but there were a lot of civil liberties problems in those communities that I just was attracted to, and we worked on some of them together. And you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, what I wanted to say is I was looking at the numbers in Dearborn, Michigan, which is a large Arab American community, half Muslim, half Christian. But I was looking on how Biden did, how not Harris, Hillary Clinton did in her race, and then also what is transpiring right now. And Biden won with 3/4 of the votes in Dearborn. 3/4 of the votes. He's pulling, he beat Trump. He only got 25%. Now Trump beat Hillary. I think. Hillary beat Trump, but it was only like 60% she got, something like that, 61%, not 75. And then you've got, this is a big city, by the way, it's about 100,000 people. And then the next one was another one I was looking at, maybe it was the Obama one. But anyway, I think what the numbers are showing is it's going to be tough for Harris and Walz to match what Biden did, and how much erosion is really key. And you can understand the anger of that community. They have relatives there. I mean, we're talking about 40,000 people who were killed in Gaza. Most of them were women and children. Had nothing to do with the political shenanigans of Sinwar and the other leaders of Hamas. And so the people here in Michigan have a lot of relatives that were killed and maimed and hurt, and everybody knows somebody there. So to expect them to not react to that in a way that's visceral, I mean, in their hearts, is unrealistic. So we're trying to get the administration, both Biden and Harris and folks, to be more respectful of that and to deal with it. Harris has been better than Biden on it, I think, in terms of her empathies and carings and assertions. And I hope that community will recognize it as they go to vote, because she's a lot better than Trump is going to be, believe me.
Mark, have you had some interactions with the Arab American community?
Yeah, in the same, reflecting the same sentiment that David has shared. I think what happened in 20, that community was reacting to what they saw from Trump in his first term. The memory of that is faded, right? The fact that the threats, I'm going to deport 1 million, Muslims when I take office and so forth, that is all faded, but it will come back if he is elected. And the more immediate visceral problem is exactly what David has described. And people are reacting as you expect anybody to react who's confronted with that situation. And so I think people may either vote for Trump or they may just not vote. I mean, they'll be paralyzed by the choices. And again, we need to be sympathetic and understanding of that. But that could cost Harris and the Democrats tens of thousands of votes in that community, and not just Dearborn. I mean, the Arab American and Muslim communities in Michigan are principally in the Dearborn area, but there are many other communities where they're quite large and significant. There's a real battle going on for their hearts and minds right now. So in the election calculus, and I don't want to sound cold here, but in the election calculus, you have to think all right, where do we pick up additional votes to make up for that loss? Is it with young voters in the state? Is it with these disaffected Republicans? Where is it? While at the same time being concerned about the loss of blue collar votes. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Brian, not just white blue collar workers, but working class voters in the Hispanic and African American communities, because there is erosion there. Yes. Again, I don't want to sound a note of pessimism and we're going to lose here this morning, but there are challenges among all these groups. From what I can see, though, the Democratic Party and the Harris campaign is aware of them, unlike Clinton campaign in 2016, yes. And they are trying to address them.
Good to see Usher and some other musical stars leaning in. You can definitely see the demographics that they're pushing on at the moment. You said something about youth mobilization being one of the best organized efforts you've seen in Michigan in a while. What are you seeing there, Mark?
Just an extraordinary effort in terms of registration and turnout and appealing to those voters on issues. Not just at the major campuses. Everybody thinks, Michigan State, Wayne State, but at campuses all over the state. I mean, we have a college in Petoskey. We have a college in Traverse City. And there's attention being paid to those student communities there to get them registered and motivated to vote. And again, it's in my years in politics in Michigan, it's the best youth turnout effort I've seen. I hope it pays benefits for us. I think it will.
That's amazing just to see that going on, that kind of organizing. Mark, I also see you're pretty active in the Macomb race for prosecutor, and you're not a big fan of the current Macomb County, which is the swing county, and people call it the swing county in the country that it tends to predict the president. But what are you seeing in Macomb County in particular, and then who are you backing in that prosecutor race?
Yeah, well, Trump has caused us real problems locally. Republicans, frankly, did quite well in 2020. The races were close, but they took most of the county-wides, including a guy named Pete Lucido, who is just as sexist and misogynistic as you can be. When he was in the state Senate, there was an investigation of his sexist conduct there. There have been further investigations since he's been prosecutor. And so I've been working very closely with Christina Hines, who is a former assistant prosecutor, both in Wayne County and Washtenaw County, has a very different agenda for that office. I mean, she's a real prosecutor, unlike Lucido, who basically is using that office as a platform to run for attorney general or governor in the future. I haven't said this publicly yet, but late last week, we prevailed in a campaign finance complaint against Lucido for misusing his office resources to campaign. And we'll start to publicize that this week. But there's been an organized effort, and I'm very proud of it. We'll see if it works, to try to elect Christina and get rid of Pete Lucido, not only because he's bad for Macomb, but because of his future ambitions.
Oh, terrific. Good luck with that. That sounds like a worthy cause and adversary to have. So David and Mark, last question for you. You got your 16 days left to run. Traditionally you start to go positive in your messaging like a week out, reinforce the narrative. But let's say you're running the Harris campaign right now. What are the key messages and themes you're trying to hammer home as you're closing, David?
Well, you want to change it was the theme that she started with when she was first nominated by the party. You want to turn the page. You don't want to go back to what we had. You don't want to go back to Trump. We've got a bright future if we can only vision it, see it, and then go after it. And doing what we're doing with students in Michigan, as Mark has just pointed out, is the kind of thing that we need to be doing with all kinds of communities, labor communities, the African American, Hispanic communities, women, and getting out the vote. You got 2 weeks left come Tuesday. You got to get the vote out. It's who gets their people to the polls.
Yeah, I think that's right, Brian. I think the closing message for Harris is a contrast. frankly. There's still a lot of people who, and I encountered this myself, who don't know Harris, right? She was even though she's been on the national stage, she was a late nominee, right?
Mhm.
Just about as late as possible.
Yeah.
And so there's still people. I was talking with a group of people in a barbershop, and there are two for Harris, and the other one said, I don't really know her well enough yet. And so I think that's what we still got to work on in the final 2 weeks while maintaining the contrast with Trump. We can't go back, which is a great theme that my client and Planned Parenthood and others have used. We can't go back on a variety of things, but Harris still needs to make the positive case for her and then turnout. I think this is going to come down to, in all the battleground states, which side gets its voters out.
If they could see, and I'll stop with this, it's Mark's last point. If they could see Harris and how she handled Brett Baer in that interview on Fox, there she was in command. She wouldn't let him bully her. She wouldn't let him get away with bringing half truths. She was absolutely in command of that interview, and I think as Gene Robinson did in an op-ed piece, I mean, she really stole that day, that show. She was great on it, and to a Fox audience. So, is she going to change anybody on Fox? I'm not sure she's going to change anybody on Fox. Maybe a few people. But what she did is she told people that weren't sure, didn't know about her, that she could command things, that she was strong and that she was tough. And
I thought that was a huge interview. Yeah.
Forced in the last couple of weeks as well.
I have to do an overtime question because you hit on something. We're in the overtime period. Elon Musk, you talked about the ground game, and the Democrats have a pretty traditional grassroots, multi-dimensional ground game with volunteers. I was out in Benton Harbor door knocking for Joey Andrews and Kamala Harris, right? Good local candidate there. But they're outsourcing to Elon Musk and PACs. And Mark, I had to get an overtime question in because I got to get your sense on how is that playing out, and what do you this pay when you hire people to do your door knocking? What usually results?
Well, I think I tweeted about this yesterday. I think it's a very risky strategy because you get people who are mercenaries, right? And they figure out a way to game the system. Oh, I can report that I talked to David Bonior when in fact I didn't, but I got paid. So I try to avoid that at all costs, literally, in any campaign I'm associated with. And from what I can see, those problems are happening to the Musk operation. I mean, there's just so much volume, though. I mean, they're still out there, but I think they're getting a lot of that where people are lying about what they're doing.
Well, I'm feeling more optimistic knowing that, Mark, that you're on this case and you're watching things. That makes me feel a lot better that we have good attorneys like you out there fighting this fight. David, any closing thoughts in this home stretch?
I want to thank Mark for coming on and being with us this morning. I mean, he's such an asset to justice, to civil liberties, to the people of the state of Michigan and to the country, frankly. And so it's really great to have you, and look forward to working with you for another 50 years.
Well, thank you both for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for joining the Civic Pulse. Next week, we'll dive into Wisconsin as our swing state. So thanks, Mark. This was awesome. Take care.